I learned something new about Memorial Day that has forever changed my perspective, and I'd love to share this with you. Hi, everybody. I'm Jenna, and this is Smarter News. And Memorial Day is a well known holiday in America. It honors those who were specifically killed in action, killed in combat, in service to the nation. And so it's a solemn, serious holiday. And at the same time, I'm sure you are seeing, celebration signs. There's parades and there's sales. Right before I got online here to record this for you, I was hit by emails saying 50% off. I'm like, that looks like a pretty good deal. You're inundated by the sales and the happy Memorial Days. And at the same time, it's a holiday that is not happy for so many. And it's challenging to hold these things together. It is somewhat intentional, by the way, that there are sales and celebrations and a long holiday weekend for Memorial Day. Congress passed legislation back in the 1970s that placed several holidays, including Memorial Day. So, Martin Luther King Day, President's Day, Labor Day, as part of a 3-day weekend with an eye towards economic stimulus. So, we're going to celebrate these occasions in a specific way that we think will be beneficial to the economy. So, the sales and the celebrations and the barbecues and the events are in some way intentional and part of this. And we know that sometimes a parade also has these moments that allows us to reflect on those who made the ultimate sacrifice. If you speak to those most impacted by Memorial Day, most connected to it, those that have actually lost loved ones, they will tell you that they don't want to take the barbecues away from you or the celebrations or even the sales. They just want to make sure that while you're enjoying these things, you're thinking about those who made the sacrifice and their families and keeping their stories alive. And that's one of the things that we try to do every Memorial Day here on Smarter News is that we want to make sure we talk about Memorial Day. We want to talk about the different ways and the different stories that have led to this very solemn and important day in America. And so I want to share something with you that I learned that surprised me that I didn't know. And it's really a tribute to you that I know it, because even though I feel a personal connection to Memorial Day, two of my sons are named for those who made the ultimate sacrifice. My husband is a veteran. It feels like a very personal holiday, and one that does include sadness and joy and all these conflicting emotions. I didn't really know the origin story of Memorial Day. Like where did it exactly come from? And here's what I learned that has changed my perspective. There are both many known origins of Memorial Day, and it's also a bit of a mystery. So these two things are true. Just like there are celebrations on Memorial Day and a solemn feeling, and those two things can be true. It's also true that there are known origins of Memorial Day and a lot of mystery surrounding it, because there's no single story that historians point to and say, that's where it came from. In fact, there are many, many stories that are part of a tapestry that led us to where we are today. So a few years ago, I recorded a short podcast about the origin stories, and I focused on just a few of them. And so I'd like to share that reporting with you again, because those stories haven't changed. They're still part of this origin story of this really special day, this very special moment. And I think taking a little time to learn about how did we arrive at a national memorial is really fascinating. Here's a portion of that broadcast, and I hope you have a beautiful weekend with your family and friends. We'll be back with more on smartnews.com next week. You may not realize this. I certainly didn't. But there are more than 20 origin stories for Memorial Day. There are more than 20 places around the United States that claim that their particular site is the origin for Memorial Day as we know it. So there are many, many different stories. And my goal today is not to tell you which one is true. In fact, many historians have tried to do that, and they still can't arrive at a single answer. And perhaps a single answer really isn't our goal. Perhaps the goal is to respect the story and how we arrived at this moment together. So here's my challenge to you today. I want you to ask yourself this question. What if it's all true? What if there's truth in every single storyline? What if all of these Americans from very different backgrounds, with very different experiences, living in very different regions, arrived at a common destination, a common point, with the desire to honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice? What if all the stories are true? What if all the stories are true? So, with more than 20 stories, I'm not going to be able to go through all of them. But what I'm going to do is pick 3 of them. And maybe we pick 3 this year, maybe we pick 3 next year, and we learn a little bit each time. But I'm picking 3 of the stories that often rise to the surface yet again as the ones that are most commonly referenced. And we're also going to talk about the actual original Memorial Day done at a federal level, which is really when the tradition on a national level starts to begin and become a little bit more uniformed. Although, as you'll see in the proclamation, the goal is not for our celebrations to be uniform at all. So let's get started. One of the agreements about Memorial Day is that the origins do date back to the Civil War. The Civil War spanned 1861, 1865, the bloodiest battles in American history, the bloodiest war in American history. It wasn't us fighting anyone on the outside. It was us fighting each other. And so really Memorial Day and the origins to it date back to around when the Civil War was ending in 1865. Some stories actually predate even that to 1864. But the 3 stories that I'm going to focus on today swirl around 1865, the end of the war, which actually happened officially in April 1865. And really that next period of time, that next year, as the country realizes they're going to mark a moment of a year since the Civil War ended. So a few different origin stories for you today. The first one we're going to go to is Charleston, South Carolina. Charleston, South Carolina was a site of extremely intense fighting, as so many places were in the Civil War. But on top of it, Charleston also had this horrendous fire that took place during the Civil War as well. And the whole city was just ravaged. Even dating before the Civil War, the city had dealt with hurricanes and so many other obstacles. So this is a city that has just been the epicenter of so much struggle. As the story goes, there were more than 250 Union soldiers that were being held in the city of Charleston. They were being held as prisoners of war, and they were actually being held at a racetrack, a horse racetrack, apparently. And one of the things that you should know about the Civil War is, of course, the battles were deadly and face-to-face combat, hand-to-hand combat. You were really confronting, brothers confronting brothers, friends confronting friends, face-to-face. This was a very personal war. But many people died of disease. In fact, estimates are 2/3 of the deaths of the Civil War, which range, by the way, from 650,000 to 750,000. The numbers can change. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people are actually attributed to disease. And so something you should know about this is that for this particular story, for these particular Union soldiers, the way this story is told is that all of them died of disease and that they were very haphazardly buried at this racetrack in this destroyed city. And so according to a story that historian David Blight uncovered, and he uncovered looking through different archives, there was a very interesting turn of events as the war came to a close. And clearly this mass grave was something that the locals were very aware of. Here's what David Blight writes. He writes, after the Confederate evacuation of Charleston, Black workmen went to the site, reburied the Union dead properly, and built a high fence around the cemetery. They whitewashed the fence and built an archway over an entrance on which they inscribed the words, Martyrs of the Racecourse. Blight says that they did this mass reburial, and that in the following days and weeks, there was a decision to have a celebration that Black and white Americans, there were Christian missionaries that were also there at the time, they came together for a celebration around this site. And the celebration included songs and parades and flowers that were laid on these new graves of the Union soldiers. There were speeches, and apparently there were also picnics. And so this is what happened in Charleston, South Carolina in 1865. And this is why David Blight says this is actually one of, on the record, one of the larger celebrations that we've seen that really make Memorial Day a moment. This happened in the close of the war as we were going into springtime in America. And so this he says, this is actually the origin of Memorial Day. However, those in Waterloo, New York, about 860 plus miles north, would absolutely disagree with David Blight, because they say Waterloo, New York is actually the site of the Memorial Day tradition in America. And here's how that story goes. So far north in Waterloo, there was a local pharmacist. And he really felt very passionately at the end of the war that we need to honor veterans, but specifically those who gave their lives in the Civil War. And he's talking about this in 1865, but he's having a hard time like getting people on board for what he actually wants to do. But then there was a local Civil War hero that hears about this and says, yes, absolutely, this is something that we should do. So in 1865, in early May, the city arranges a parade. And they arrange that they're going to walk to the multiple cemeteries that are around this town, and they are going to place flowers on the graves and honor the graves of those that made the ultimate sacrifice in the Civil War. What they reference is the patriotic dead. So this is very specifically those that were killed in action. And so in Waterloo, New York, they still have it up on their website as the historic site of the original Memorial Day in America. You can actually apparently visit a museum there that goes through this particular story. However, that's still not the most common story. That's still not the most common story when it comes to Memorial Day. We have to go way south for that. And in fact, this is where it gets a little bit tricky and a little bit muddled, because my impression of this, having looked at this for a couple years, is what happened in the South by women of the South actually created what we could describe now as a viral moment. And like any viral moment, sometimes it's difficult to track the exact origins. So as the story is told, there were women in Columbus, Georgia, and they decided that they were going to tend to the graves of Confederate soldiers. This apparently happened in 1866. So this is coming into the year, marking a year since the end of the Civil War. Those other stories that I just mentioned started in 1865, with the celebration in Waterloo happening in 1866. But apparently this happened in 1866, that a group of women got together. And again, who the women were and where exactly they were is a matter of some debate. Some say this happened in Georgia. Some say this happened in Mississippi. Some say others fudged the date and actually put their dates sooner than the other ones. But apparently many women decided to do this. And one of the reasons why it's believed that many women decided to do this is because apparently one woman's group wrote to multiple papers and said, this is actually what we're going to do. The papers printed this story and apparently inspired others to follow in suit. And so what the Confederate women, these were, women of the Confederacy, these were those that were tending to graves of Confederate soldiers. This is not like Waterloo, New York, where they're tending to the graves of the Union soldiers. This is in the South. But remember, at that time, if you were killed in action and you were a Union soldier and it happened in the South, the likelihood that your family would be able to come and find you, let alone tend to your grave, was an impossibility. I mean, the chances of that were very, very small. And so the way this story goes is that the women were tending to the graves of Confederate soldiers, and they were placing flowers and wreaths. They were adorning the graves. And they noticed that there were other graves in the cemetery or in this area where many were buried. And these were Union soldiers. And they had a moment where they said to themselves, no one's going to come for them. No one's going to tend to their grave. But we're going to do that today. And so they decided not only to decorate the graves of their lost ones, but also decorate the graves of others who were lost as well. And you have to think about that moment. The war, in the intensity of it, was a nightmare for everybody. It was a nightmare of a war. These women that were tending the graves of Confederate soldiers, or the Black men that decided to rebury Union soldiers in Charleston, or those that decided to honor those that were buried in Waterloo, New York, they were honoring people that they knew, they were also honoring people that maybe they didn't know. They were remembering a war that certainly brought terror to their lives. The fear of not only losing a loved one, but that the war would come to your front door, and what that would mean for you and your family is a thing of nightmares. Would they burn your home? Would they murder you? It was a violent, terrible war. And so this action by the women of the South apparently spread around the country, because how the North and Northern papers interpreted it was that they were in a sense forgiving. And actually, one Washington, D.C. paper wrote it in this way: the action of the ladies on this occasion, in bearing whatever animosities or ill feeling may have been engendered in the late war towards those who fought against them, is worthy of all praise. And so the story of the women doing this, the image of the women doing this, spreads all around the country. And it becomes something that people are talking about. They're writing about. There's poetry, there's songs. I'm going to read you one of them in a little bit, that come out of this almost folklore. I mean, clearly something happened. Where it happened, the precise date, who did it first, we don't really know. But this particular image of the women tending to the graves is what ignited a more broad conversation of what this day could look like on a broader level. So that was all in 1866. And so these different Memorial Day celebrations are happening around the country. They're happening in different locations. People are being inspired. They're hearing songs, they're hearing poetry, they're doing it themselves. There was a feeling about doing a Memorial Day celebration. Remember, the war ends in April. So the idea was, we're going to do the celebration to remember those who gave their lives in May. That's when, according to lore, this was part of the reason, that's when the most wildflowers in America are blooming. So we're going to have a lot of flowers that we're going to be able to adorn the graves with. We're not marking the end of the war. The end of the war at that time, by the way, depending on where you lived, may feel like a different date, but we're going to do this in May as we're going into summer. And this is going to be a moment that we're going to honor those who gave their lives. And we're going to honor both Union and Confederate soldiers. So this is happening around a country that's trying to navigate itself out of this terrible, terrible chapter. There's no blueprint for the way forward and how this is all going to work out, how America is actually going to survive this. And if you remember, we talked a little bit about this on Smarter News. Arlington National Cemetery was a new concept. It was something that came up partly because of need. There were so many who were dying around Washington, D.C., and there was a need to be able to put the bodies in a place that could hold them, that there would be enough land. And here was this big estate that was available that was taken over by Union forces. So Arlington National Cemetery is new. It's only been open for a few years. It's very active. And now that the war is over, General Logan, a Civil War veteran himself, who's the head of a very large and powerful veterans organization at the time, he is the one that really puts Memorial Day down as an official holiday. And on May 5th, 1868, he maps out what Memorial Day would look like. And this is a Memorial Day order. At this time, this celebration of Memorial Day would happen at Arlington Cemetery. President Grant, who headed up the Union forces at one time, was going to be present there. A few thousand people were going to be present at Arlington Cemetery. Their mission then was that they were going to set out American flags and that they were also going to tend to the graves. And believe it or not, since 1868, almost exactly the same thing has happened every year at Arlington. Amazing. So I want to read to you directly the order that was given on May 5th for this celebration that would happen on May 30th. So the 30th day of May, 1868, writes General Logan, is designated for the purpose of strewing with flowers or otherwise decorating the graves of comrades who died in defense of their country during the late rebellion, the Civil War, and whose bodies now lie in almost every city, village, and hamlet churchyard in the land. In this observance, no form or ceremony is prescribed. He's saying nothing official is prescribed here, But posts and comrades will, in their own way, arrange such fitting services and testimonials of respect as circumstances may permit. So he's saying this is going to happen on May 30th. He goes on to say, we should guard their graves with sacred vigilance. Let no vandalism or avarice or neglect, no ravages of time testify to the present or to the coming generations that we have forgotten as a people the cost of free and undivided republic. And other eyes grow dull, and other hands slack, and other hearts cold in the solemn trust. Ours shall keep it well, as long as the light and warmth of life remains in us. Let us then, at the time appointed, gather around their sacred remains and garland the passionless mounds above them with choicest flowers of springtime. Let us raise above them the dear old flag they saved from dishonor. Let us, in this solemn presence, renew our pledges to aid and assist those whom they have left among us as sacred charges upon the nation's gratitude, the soldiers and sailors, widow and orphans. He ends it with, it is the purpose of the commander-in-chief to inaugurate this observance with the hope it will be kept up from year to year, while a survivor of the war remains to honor the memory of his departed comrades. He earnestly desires the public press to call attention to this order and lend its friendly aid in bringing it to the notice of comrades in all parts of the country in time for simultaneous compliance therewith. So look at that. He's talking about the press. He's like, press, get on board. You need to spread the word. We got a couple weeks. May 30th is going to be the day. But what words to think about. We should guard their graves with sacred vigilance. Let no vandalism of avarice or neglect, no ravages of time testify to the present or to the coming generations that we have forgotten as a people the cost of a free and undivided republic. Really powerful words.